Okay, you want to own a $20 million cold storage facility. A concrete box the size of several football fields, holding pallet after pallet of frozen chicken, ice cream, vaccines, and produce at temperatures cold enough to stop time itself. Every square foot of that building is booked. Every dock door is busy. And America's entire frozen food supply chain quietly depends on buildings exactly like yours. It looks like the ultimate business. The demand is basically guaranteed because nobody's stopping refrigeration anytime soon. Here's what nobody tells you before you sign that $20 million loan. A cold storage facility isn't a business built on renting space. It's a business built on winning a permanent, unforgiving war against physics. Because the moment that building's temperature climbs even a few degrees, everything inside it can turn from valuable inventory into a total loss in hours. And everything expensive about this industry exists to make sure that never happens. The compressor doesn't care how full the warehouse is. The electric company doesn't care what's stored inside. The regulator definitely doesn't care how good your excuse is if a shipment of vaccines goes bad. So what actually makes a cold storage facility profitable? Not the size of the building, not the length of the client list. It's the ability to keep an entire building below freezing every single hour of every single day, forever, without a single mistake. Let's build the real $20 million number, piece by piece. Start with the box itself. A cold storage facility isn't a warehouse with a thermostat turned down. It's a completely different kind of building, with insulated panel walls a foot thick, vapor barriers to stop moisture from freezing inside the walls, and reinforced flooring rated to handle both heavy racking and, in the deep freeze sections, ground that can actually freeze and heave over time if it isn't specially engineered. A mid-size facility, roughly 100,000 square feet, commonly costs $12 to $18 million just for the building shell and insulation before a single refrigeration unit gets installed. Land near a highway interchange or a port, which this business genuinely needs for constant truck access, adds another $1 to $3 million depending on the market. Then come the refrigeration systems themselves: industrial ammonia or CO2 compressor systems, evaporator coils lining the ceiling, and a control system monitoring every zone in the building in real time. That alone commonly runs $3 to $6 million for a facility this size. And it's the single most important system in the entire building, because everything else exists to protect what that system is doing. Add loading docks with insulated dock seals, backup generators sized to keep the entire facility frozen through a multi-day power outage, and a fire suppression system engineered specifically for a space where standard sprinklers would just freeze solid. And you land at your $20 million, spent entirely before a single pallet gets stored. And that number assumes a straightforward build on a clean site. Retrofitting an existing dry warehouse into cold storage, which some investors attempt to save money, often ends up costing nearly as much as building new, because the insulation, the flooring, and the electrical infrastructure typically all have to be torn out and redone to handle the demands of sustained sub-freezing temperatures. Most experienced operators in this space will tell you the same thing. There's very little shortcut available in cold storage construction, because physics doesn't negotiate on foot-thick insulation or properly rated flooring just because a building already exists on the site. Here's the cost that makes this business fundamentally different from a normal warehouse. Electricity isn't a line item. It's the actual engine of the business, running 24 hours a day, every single day of the year, with zero tolerance for interruption. A 100,000 square foot freezer facility commonly runs $300,000 to over $1 million a year in electricity alone, just to keep the compressors running and the temperature holding steady. That number climbs sharply in summer, when the compressors have to fight harder against outside heat just to maintain the exact same internal temperature, meaning your single biggest cost gets more expensive precisely during the months your business can't afford a single hiccup. And electricity isn't optional the way it might be for an ordinary retail store closing for the night. A cold storage facility that loses power for even a few hours in a heat wave can see product temperatures climb into a danger zone, which is exactly why backup generators aren't a nice to have here. They're load-bearing infrastructure, tested regularly, fueled and ready. Because the fuel cost of running a generator for 2 days is nothing compared to the cost of an entire building's inventory spoiling at once. A cold storage facility runs on people working in genuinely brutal conditions, and that changes almost everything about labor costs. Workers in the deep freeze zones, sometimes as cold as -20 degrees Fahrenheit, wear specialized cold weather gear the facility has to provide and maintain. And OSHA mandates strict limits on how long anyone can work in that environment before a mandatory warm-up break. Forklift operators need equipment rated specifically for cold. Standard batteries and hydraulic fluid behave differently below freezing. And turnover in these roles tends to run higher than a typical warehouse, because working an 8-hour shift in a freezer is a genuinely different job than working one at room temperature. Wages commonly run 15 to 20% above a comparable dry warehouse role, just to keep positions filled. A facility this size typically needs supervisors, forklift operators, maintenance technicians certified specifically on ammonia refrigeration systems, and quality control staff verifying temperature logs constantly. Commonly 40 to 80 employees, depending on how much handling activity happens on top of pure storage, with total labor costs running $3 to $6 million a year. This industry sits under more regulatory scrutiny than almost any other warehouse category because of what's actually stored inside. Facilities holding food product fall under USDA and FDA oversight, with regular inspections and detailed temperature logging requirements that have to be maintained and auditable at any moment, not just when an inspector happens to show up. Facilities that also store pharmaceuticals, and a growing number do, given how much of the vaccine and biologic supply chain depends on precise cold chains, face an entirely separate layer of FDA compliance, sometimes requiring validated, redundant temperature monitoring systems that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to install and certify. And then there's the ammonia itself. Industrial refrigeration commonly uses anhydrous ammonia, an extremely effective refrigerant and also a genuinely hazardous chemical, which means the facility falls under EPA and OSHA process safety rules requiring regular risk management audits, specialized leak detection systems, and an emergency response plan that has to be filed, tested, and kept current. A serious ammonia leak isn't just a safety incident. It can shut down the entire facility for days while regulators investigate, with zero revenue coming in the entire time. Insurance on a cold storage facility runs meaningfully higher than almost any other industrial property for one simple reason. When something goes wrong here, it tends to go wrong for the entire building at once, not just one corner of it. Property insurance has to cover not just the building, but the refrigeration systems themselves, which are expensive, specialized, and slow to repair or replace if something fails. Spoilage and inventory insurance, sometimes called warehouseman's legal liability, covers the value of customers' product if a temperature failure ruins it. And given that a single, fully loaded freezer facility can hold tens of millions of dollars of frozen food or pharmaceuticals at any given time, that coverage alone can run hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in premiums. Add liability coverage for the ammonia system specifically, business interruption coverage in case a mechanical failure takes the facility offline for weeks, and total insurance costs for a facility this size commonly land between $500,000 and $1.5 million annually. A genuinely serious cost, but one that exists because the alternative, one uninsured refrigeration failure destroying a warehouse full of someone else's inventory, could end the business in a single afternoon. So where does the revenue come from? Storage fees are the baseline, commonly charged per pallet position per month, running anywhere from $20 to $50 a pallet, depending on the temperature zone, with deep freeze space commanding a real premium over standard refrigerated space. But just like a dry warehouse, storage alone isn't where the real margin lives. Handling fees, charged every time a pallet is received, moved, or shipped out, stack on top of storage revenue. And a facility running high inventory turnover, like a distributor moving product constantly, rather than one storing it for months, can generate significantly more from handling than from storage itself. Blast freezing is its own premium service, rapidly dropping a product's temperature from just processed to fully frozen, which preserves quality far better than slow freezing, and commands a meaningfully higher fee than standard storage. Value-added services round out the picture: case picking, repackaging, and cross-docking for clients who need product flowed through the facility rather than simply parked in it. A well-run facility blending storage, handling, and value-added services can generate meaningfully higher revenue per square foot than a facility renting pure static storage space. The same principle you'd see in a dry warehouse, just with far higher stakes if any part of the process fails. The client base here is genuinely diverse, and that diversification is part of what makes this a resilient business. Food distributors and grocery chains need buffer inventory of frozen and refrigerated product constantly, especially with the rise of grocery delivery services that require fast, reliable cold fulfillment. Meat and seafood processors need cold storage as a mandatory link in their supply chain, not an optional add-on. Pharmaceutical and biologics companies increasingly need validated cold storage for vaccines, insulin, and other temperature-sensitive medications, a category that's only grown since recent years put a spotlight on cold chain logistics nationwide. Agricultural exporters need seasonal storage to hold produce until market prices are favorable. And even ice cream and specialty food brands need deep freeze capacity that most standard warehouses simply can't offer. This mix means a well-run facility isn't betting its entire revenue on one industry's health. A slowdown in one client category doesn't necessarily sink the whole building. Added up for a mid-size 100,000 square foot facility running at healthy occupancy. Electricity, $700,000. Labor, $4 million. Insurance, $900,000. Compliance, maintenance, and refrigeration system servicing, $1.5 million. Property taxes and general overhead, $800,000. Total operating costs commonly land around $8 million a year, against revenue that, for a well-occupied facility blending storage and handling fees, can run $12 to $16 million annually. That leaves a real, meaningful operating margin, which is exactly why institutional investors have poured billions into this asset class in recent years. But that margin depends entirely on one non-negotiable condition: the building staying cold, without exception, every single hour it's operating. Here's the scenario that separates well-run cold storage operators from ones that don't survive their first real crisis. A major compressor failure, combined with a regional power outage during a summer heat wave, can start pushing internal temperatures upward within hours. If backup power or backup refrigeration capacity isn't sufficient, or a critical part isn't in stock and has to be shipped in, a facility can lose an entire building's worth of inventory before repairs are even complete. Unlike almost any other kind of property damage, spoiled frozen inventory usually can't be salvaged, discounted, or repurposed. It simply becomes a total loss, all at once, for every single client with product in that building. This is why redundant refrigeration systems, properly maintained backup generators, and genuinely responsive insurance aren't optional extras in this business. They're the entire reason a facility survives long enough to become the reliable, profitable asset the spreadsheet promised on day one. Despite all of that risk, cold storage has become one of the most sought-after categories in American industrial real estate, for reasons that aren't going away. Grocery delivery and e-commerce grocery have massively increased demand for cold fulfillment space near population centers. Reshoring of pharmaceutical and food manufacturing has increased domestic demand for validated cold storage. And existing cold storage capacity in the US genuinely hasn't kept pace with demand, meaning well-located, well-built facilities can often command premium rates and long-term leases from clients who have very few realistic alternatives nearby. This is exactly why large institutional players and REITs have been acquiring and building cold storage aggressively. The barriers to entry are genuinely high, which protects existing operators from a flood of easy new competition, the way a regular warehouse might face. So the real decision in this business was never really about the size of the building. It's this: are you prepared to run one of the most operationally demanding property types in American real estate, where a single mechanical failure can erase months of profit in an afternoon, in exchange for a business with genuinely high barriers to entry, diversified demand, and margins that reward operators who take the physics seriously? The $20 million was never really the hard part. Raising that capital is a spreadsheet problem. Banks and institutional lenders understand this asset class well, and a solid location with a signed anchor tenant can make financing this kind of project genuinely achievable for a serious operator. The real business is the unglamorous, unrelenting discipline of keeping a concrete box below freezing every single hour for decades through heat waves, power grid strain, equipment aging, and staff turnover, without ever once treating that discipline as optional. Because in this industry, the compressor doesn't care how good your quarter looked. It doesn't care about your 5-year growth plan or your investor deck. It only cares whether it's still running tonight. And the operators who build real, lasting wealth in cold storage are the ones who never once let themselves forget that.